I had 1 week to convince my family I wasn't single, so I hired my gorgeous coworker to play my fiancé. But I didn't plan for two things: the massive blizzard that trapped us in one room and my jealous ex-boyfriend who was determined to prove our engagement was a lie. The tires of my vintage sedan crunched over the fresh Maine snow, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my chest. Beside me, Kyle was checking his reflection in the visor mirror, looking entirely too calm for a man who was about to lie to my entire family for the next 7 days. He wasn't just my coworker. He was the most charming, frustratingly handsome architect in the city, and today, he was my fiancé. "Remember the rules, Kyle," I whispered, my breath fogging the cold air. "No mention of the office. We met at a coffee shop in Chelsea, and for the love of God, keep your hands to yourself unless my mother is looking." He turned to me, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across his face. He reached over, his fingers grazing my jawline as he tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Relax, Madison. I'm an architect. I know how to build a convincing structure, even one made of lies." I wanted to snap at him, but the front door of the farmhouse swung open, and my heart stopped. My mother was there, beaming, but standing right behind her was the one person I hoped had moved to another planet: Caleb, my ex. The man who had broken my heart 2 years ago was standing in my childhood home, looking at me with a mixture of shock and possessive anger. Kyle must have felt me stiffen because he stepped out of the car, walked around to my side, and pulled me into his arms. Before I could even say hello to my mother, Kyle leaned down and kissed me, hard. It was a performance, a public claim designed to silence the room, but as his lips moved against mine, the Maine winter suddenly felt like a midsummer heatwave. The farmhouse smelled like cinnamon and pine, a scent that usually made me feel safe, but today it felt like a trap. As we moved into the living room, Caleb didn't even try to hide his disdain. He had been a family friend since we were kids, which meant he was always around. But seeing him now, after the way he'd left me, made my blood boil. Kyle, however, was playing his role with terrifying precision. He had his arm draped around my shoulder, his thumb tracing small circles on my collarbone that made it nearly impossible to focus on the conversation. "So, Kyle," Caleb said, his voice dripping with forced casualness as he leaned against the fireplace mantel. "A coffee shop in Chelsea. That's a bit cliché for a girl like Madison, don't you think? She always told me she wanted someone who understood her roots." I felt Kyle's grip tighten just a fraction. He didn't miss a beat. "Maybe she just needed someone who understood her future, Caleb. Roots are important, but they're meant to support something that grows, not keep it buried in the past." The tension was so thick I could taste it. My mother, sensing the impending explosion, quickly announced that dinner was ready, but not before dropping the ultimate bombshell. "Oh, Madison, dear, I'm so sorry, but with the storm coming and the roof leak in the guest wing, Kyle will have to stay in your old room. I hope you two don't mind sharing." I felt the blood drain from my face. 1 bed, 1 week, and a fake fiancé who was starting to look at me like he actually wanted to eat me for dessert. As we sat down to dinner, I caught Caleb staring at us, his knuckles white as he gripped his wine glass. He was livid, and for the first time, I realized that Kyle wasn't just helping me save face. He was enjoying the war. That night, the Maine storm finally hit, rattling the windows of my childhood bedroom. The room was small, filled with relics of my teenage years, and it felt even smaller with a 6-foot-tall Kyle standing in the center of it. He had taken off his dress shirt, revealing a torso that belonged on a statue, not in my flowery bedroom. I stayed glued to the far side of the bed, clutching the duvet as if it were armor. "You don't have to be so dramatic, Madison," Kyle said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "I'm not going to bite, unless you ask." "This wasn't part of the deal, Kyle," I hissed, trying to ignore the way the candlelight played over his muscles. "We were supposed to have separate rooms. This is getting too close." He walked over to the bed, the mattress sinking under his weight as he sat down beside me. He didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from him was overwhelming. "Caleb is in the hallway," he whispered, leaning close. "I heard him packing outside your door 5 minutes ago. He thinks he can still get to you. Is he right?" I looked at him, the shadows making his eyes look like dark pools of ink. "No," I lied, though the memory of Caleb's betrayal still felt like a dull ache. Kyle reached out, his thumb catching my bottom lip, pulling it down just a fraction. "Then prove it to him," he murmured. "And prove it to me." He leaned in, his breath hot against my neck, and for a second I thought he was going to kiss me again. but he just pulled back, a ghost of a smile on his lips, and laid down on his side of the bed. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of every breath he took, realizing that the most dangerous person in this house wasn't my ex. It was the man lying inches away from me. The next morning, the house was a flurry of holiday activity. My father insisted we all go out to the barn to help decorate the community tree, a tradition that usually brought me joy, but now felt like an invitation for disaster. Caleb was there, of course, hovering like a dark cloud. Every time Kyle and I shared a look or a touch, I could see Caleb's jaw clenching. He finally caught me alone in the corner of the barn while Kyle was busy lifting my young nephew to reach the higher branches. "We're really going to do this, Madison," Caleb hissed, grabbing my wrist. "Bring some city slicker home to mock us. I know this isn't real. You're doing this to hurt me." I wrenched my arm away, my eyes flashing. "The world doesn't revolve around you, Caleb. I'm happy. Kyle is everything you aren't, loyal, successful, and actually here." He laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "He's a suit, Madison. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know what you look like when you cry or how you take your coffee. I do." Before I could respond, a heavy hand landed on Caleb's shoulder. It was Kyle. His face was a mask of cold fury, his fingers digging into Caleb's coat. "I know enough to know when a man is overstaying his welcome," Kyle said, his voice dangerously low. "The lady said she's done with you. I suggest you listen." Caleb looked like he wanted to swing, but he caught a glimpse of the raw power in Kyle's eyes and backed off. As Caleb walked away, Kyle turned to me, his expression softening instantly. He reached out and picked up a fallen crystal ornament, handing it to me. "Don't let him break your spirit, Madison. That's the only thing he's good at." In that moment, the line between fake and real didn't just blur, it vanished entirely. By the third day, the snow was 6 feet deep, trapping us all inside the farmhouse. The forced proximity was starting to wear everyone thin. My family was suspicious, Caleb was desperate, and I was losing my mind. Every time I turned a corner, Kyle was there, his hand on my waist, his scent filling my lungs, his voice whispering "darling" in my ear with a conviction that made my knees weak. But it was the way he looked at me when no one was watching that scared me the most. It wasn't the look of a business partner. It was the look of a man who was hungry for something he couldn't have. We ended up in the kitchen late that night, searching for leftover pie by the light of the refrigerator. The house was silent, but the air between us was screaming. "Why are you doing such a good job at this, Kyle?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "You're an architect. You have projects, deadlines. Why spend your vacation lying to a bunch of strangers in Maine?" He stopped, a piece of apple pie halfway to his mouth. He set the plate down and walked toward me, trapping me between his arms and the counter. "Maybe I'm not lying as much as you think I am," he said, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my bones. He stepped closer, his chest brushing against mine. The heat was unbearable. "I've watched you in the office for 2 years, Madison. I watched you hide behind your work because you were afraid of being hurt again. I didn't come here to save your reputation. I came here to see if I could be the one to finally make you feel safe." I looked up at him, my heart hammering. He wasn't playing the part anymore. He was confessing. And as his head lowered, I didn't pull away. I didn't think about the contract or the scandal. I just wanted him. Our lips met with a desperate, pent-up energy that made the rest of the world fall away. It wasn't a fake kiss for the cameras or for Caleb. It was raw, honest, and terrifying. Kyle's hands were in my hair, pulling me closer as if he could merge our souls right there in the kitchen. I tasted the sweetness of the pie and the salt of the Maine air on his skin. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. "We can't," I whispered, though my body was screaming for the opposite. "The lie, it'll ruin everything." "The lie is the only thing keeping us apart, Madison," Kyle replied, his voice ragged. "I don't care about the board of directors or the office gossip. I want you. The real you. Not the fiancé, not the CEO, just you." We moved back to my bedroom, our movements silent as we slipped past my parents' room. The moment the door clicked shut, the world exploded. We made love with a fierce, quiet intensity that shattered every wall I'd ever built. His touch was worshipping. His whispers were promises I wasn't sure he could keep. But in the dark of that Maine night, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Truly seen. He knew the curve of my waist, the way I gasped when he touched the sensitive skin of my neck, and the way I clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world of ice. As I fell asleep in his arms, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before Caleb had broken me. But as the sun began to peek through the frost on the windows, a chilling thought hit me. We still had to go downstairs. We still had to face the lies. And Caleb was still waiting in the shadows, ready to burn it all down. The morning after was a blur of secret smiles and lingering touches that felt entirely too real. But the peace was short-lived. During brunch, Caleb stood up, his face pale and eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, and he was holding a stack of papers in his shaking hand. "I knew it!" he shouted, slamming the papers onto the dining table. My heart stopped. I recognized the letterhead. It was the contract Kyle and I had signed back in the city. The one detailing the engagement and the payment for his time. "It's all a lie," Caleb screamed, looking at my parents. "Your perfect daughter hired this guy. He's an architect at her firm and she's paying him to be here. She's been mocking you, mocking this family just to make me jealous." The room went deathly silent. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, and my father's face turned a deep, dangerous red. I looked at Kyle, expecting him to have a clever architect's answer, but he was silent. He just looked at the papers, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Is it true, Madison?" my father asked, his voice low and vibrating with disappointment. I couldn't speak. The lie had been exposed in the worst possible way in front of the people I loved most. Caleb was smirking, a triumphant, ugly look on his face. He thought he had won. He thought that by destroying the lie, I would crawl back to him. I looked at my parents, tears stinging my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "It's true, we had a contract." Caleb let out a loud, mocking laugh, but it was cut short by the sound of Kyle's chair scraping against the floor. Kyle stood up, but he didn't look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had finally been set free. He walked over to the table, picked up the contract, and slowly, deliberately, tore it into tiny pieces. He let the scraps fall like confetti onto the floor. "The contract was real," Kyle said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "We did sign it, because I was a coward who didn't know how else to get close to the woman I've loved from a distance for 2 years. The room gasped. I looked at him, my breath catching. "But that contract died the moment we crossed the main border," Kyle continued, walking toward me and taking my hand. He looked my father directly in the eye. "I'm not here because of money. I'm here because Madison is the only person I want to build a life with. If you want to be mad at someone, be mad at me for being too afraid to ask her out the right way. But don't you dare think her feelings for this family are a lie." Caleb was sputtering, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "He's lying. He's just trying to save the deal." Kyle didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on mine. "I'm done with the deals, Madison. I'm done with the lies." He turned to my parents. "I'm leaving today so you can have your family time. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to prove to your daughter that I don't need a contract to love her." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there in the middle of a shattered holiday, my heart racing with a hope I was too afraid to name. The house was quiet after Kyle left. My parents were hurt, but they were also confused. My mother eventually came to my room. Sitting on the edge of my bed. "He loves you, doesn't he?" she asked softly. I nodded, the tears finally falling. "I think he does, and I think I love him," she sighed, stroking my hair. "Then why are you sitting here? Caleb is downstairs trying to convince your father that you should give him another chance. Do you want that life, Madison?" I looked around my room, the relics of the girl who had been broken by Caleb, and I realized I was done with her. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and walked downstairs. Caleb was in the living room talking animatedly to my father. When he saw me, he smiled that possessive, arrogant smile. "Madison, thank God. Now that the liar is gone, we can finally talk about us." I didn't let him finish. I walked straight up to him and looked him in the eye. "There is no us, Caleb. There hasn't been an us since the day you walked away. You didn't expose Kyle to save me. You did it to hurt me. And that's the difference between you two." I turned to my father. "I'm sorry for the lie. I was embarrassed and hurt, and I didn't think I was enough on my own, but Kyle saw me when I couldn't see myself." I grabbed my car keys from the hook. "I'm going after him." Caleb tried to grab my arm, but my father stepped between us, his face stern. "I think you've said enough, Caleb. It's time you went home." I didn't wait to see him leave. I ran out into the Maine snow, the cold air feeling like a blessing as I jumped into my car and sped toward the airport. I found him at the gate, sitting alone with a coffee cup looking out at the plains. He looked tired, but when he saw me running toward him, his entire face transformed. I didn't say a word. I just threw my arms around his neck and kissed him right there in the middle of the terminal. "You forgot something," I whispered when we finally broke apart. He smiled, his hands resting on my waist. "My dignity, the contract." "No," I said, looking into his eyes. "Me." He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. "I didn't forget you, Madison. I was just waiting for you to realize that you didn't need a fake fiancé. You just needed a real partner." We didn't go back to the office as boss and employee. We went back as something entirely new. The scandal at home eventually faded, replaced by the reality of a love that didn't need a PR strategy or a signed agreement. A year later, we were back in Maine. This time, there was no contract, no lies, and certainly no Caleb. We were standing in front of the same farmhouse, the snow falling softly around us. Kyle turned to me, his eyes shining with a familiar intensity. He dropped to one knee, the Maine wind whipping around us. "I told your father a year ago that I'd spend the rest of my life proving I don't need a contract to love you. I'd like to start that officially. Madison, will you marry me? For real this time?" I didn't need to think. I didn't need to calculate the optics. I just said yes. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't saving my reputation. I was building a life on the only foundation that mattered: the truth.